They said grief makes you weak. They said a widow with nothing but splintered wood and trembling hands couldn't survive one winter alone. But when her dead husband's brother stood there watching her struggle in the cold, he wasn't just watching a woman rebuild a shelter. He was watching a secret threaten to rise from the ashes. And before this story unfolds, if you believe strength isn't loud, if you believe love doesn't die when the body does, and if you believe karma always comes collecting, subscribe now. Because stories like this, they don't just entertain, they stay with you. The wind came first, sharp and unforgiving, carrying dust across the dry land like whispers of unfinished business. Mara Whitfield stood in the middle of what used to be her home, gripping a warped plank of wood with fingers still raw from yesterday's splinters. The house had burned 3 weeks ago. The fire department ruled it accidental. Faulty wiring, old insulation, no investigation needed. But Mara knew better. Grief had sharpened her instincts in ways she didn't understand yet. Her husband, Caleb, had died in that fire. And now she was alone, trying to build a shelter out of the broken boards left behind. Every nail she hammered into place felt like defiance. Every board she lifted was heavier than it should have been, because it carried memory. Laughter, arguments, promises. And standing 20 yards away, leaning against his black pickup truck like a shadow that refused to leave, was her dead husband's brother, Elias Whitfield. Elias hadn't offered help, not once. He just watched. His boots planted firmly in the dirt, arms folded, eyes hidden beneath the brim of his hat. If strangers passed by, they would have assumed he was supervising, protecting. But Mara felt something else radiating from him: calculation. The Whitfield land had been in the family for generations. And Caleb had been the last legal owner. When he died without a will, everything defaulted to his closest blood relative, Elias. Except Caleb had told Mara something 6 months before the fire. Something he'd whispered into her hair while they lay awake one restless night. If anything happens to me, the land stays yours. The papers are safe. She never asked where. She trusted him. She trusted that there would always be time. Now time felt like an enemy. She lifted another board and nailed it across 2 uneven beams she'd propped upright to form a crude wall. The shelter wasn't meant to last forever, just long enough to survive until she could prove what Caleb had intended. She refused to leave the land. That would mean surrender. And Elias knew it. That was why he watched. Waiting for her to break. Waiting for exhaustion to win. Waiting for her to pack her few belongings and drive away so he could claim everything without a fight. But Mara Whitfield did not break easily. On the 4th day of building, her hands bled through the bandages. The sky turned gray with the threat of rain. She dragged a rusted metal sheet across the top beams to serve as roofing, her body straining under its weight. It slipped, nearly crushed her, and before she hit the ground, strong hands caught the sheet mid-fall. For the first time since the fire, Elias moved. He steadied it, not looking at her, not speaking, just holding the weight long enough for her to secure it properly. Their eyes met only once. His expression unreadable. Then he stepped back again, returning to his silent vigil. That night, rain poured relentlessly. Mara huddled inside her half-finished shelter, wrapped in a thin blanket that smelled faintly of smoke. The storm howled, but the structure held. Each creak sounded like a test. Each gust dared her to surrender. She didn't sleep. Instead, she thought about Caleb. About the way Elias had argued with him 2 nights before the fire. About money. About selling a portion of the land to a development company. Caleb refused. He wanted preservation. Elias wanted profit. The next morning, Mara found something strange near the burned foundation of the old house. A small fireproof lockbox half buried beneath charred debris. Her heart pounded so violently she thought she might faint. She dug it out with trembling hands. The latch was damaged but intact. She carried it back to her shelter, shielding it from Elias's view. Inside were documents, insurance papers, land deeds, and a notarized statement signed by Caleb transferring sole ownership of the land to Mara in the event of his death. Dated 2 weeks before the fire. Her breath caught. Caleb had known something, or feared something. That afternoon, Elias approached her for the first time. "You planning on staying through winter?" he asked casually. She didn't answer. She simply held up the document. She watched something flicker in his eyes, not surprise. Recognition. The mask slipped for half a second. And that was all she needed to see. "You won't last out here alone," he said, voice tightening. Sign it over. I'll make sure you're comfortable. In town. I'd rather freeze, she replied. The days that followed became a silent war. Tools went missing. Supplies she'd purchased disappeared overnight. Her water barrel was tipped over while she slept. Each act subtle enough to deny. Obvious enough to intimidate. But Mara adapted. She locked everything inside the shelter. She installed a simple bell trap near the entrance using fishing wire and scrap metal. She kept her father's old hunting rifle beside her bedroll. Then came the twist she never expected. Late one evening, as orange light melted into dusk, a sheriff's cruiser rolled onto the property. Sheriff Dalton stepped out, hat in hand. His expression wasn't sympathetic. It was cautious. We've reopened the fire investigation, he said. New evidence. Elias stood frozen beside his truck. Mara felt the air shift. Apparently, traces of accelerant were found in the debris, overlooked during the initial assessment. An anonymous tip had called it in. Elias's jaw tightened. The sheriff asked routine questions. Where had Elias been that night? Why had neighbors reported hearing shouting hours before the fire started? Why did his truck match the description of a vehicle seen leaving shortly after flames erupted? Mara said nothing. She didn't know who had made the tip. But as the sheriff drove away, she noticed something Elias didn't: a second car parked down the dirt road. A woman sitting inside, watching. When Elias finally left for the evening, the woman approached. She introduced herself as Claire, an insurance investigator. Caleb had increased the policy coverage significantly 1 month before the fire. Named no beneficiary change, which meant if foul play was involved, the payout froze until the case closed. I think your husband suspected someone, Claire said quietly. And I think that someone realized too late he wasn't going to get the money. That night, Mara didn't feel alone anymore. She felt dangerous. Days turned into weeks. Pressure mounted. Elias grew erratic. He confronted her openly now. Accused her of fabricating documents. Claimed she manipulated Caleb before his death. But each accusation sounded thinner. Desperation creeping in. One morning, Mara woke to the smell of gasoline outside her shelter. Panic surged. She grabbed the rifle and stepped out carefully. Elias stood there holding a red fuel can. Smiling faintly. You think a piece of paper saves you? He asked. Before he could take another step, headlights blinded the yard. Sheriff Dalton's cruiser. And behind it, Claire's sedan. They had been waiting, recording, gathering enough to build a case. Elias froze as deputies stepped out. And that was the final twist. As they cuffed him, Elias began laughing. Not hysterically. Calmly. You think she's innocent, he said to the sheriff. Ask her what Caleb found in her phone. The words hit Mara like ice water. Sheriff Dalton turned slowly. What's he talking about? Mara's heart pounded. Because there was something. A message she had deleted. A conversation with an old friend. Innocent in context, but suspicious without it. Caleb had seen it. They'd argued. But they had reconciled. Elias had overheard fragments and twisted them into motive. Claire stepped forward. We pulled phone records. The timeline clears her. But it does place you here, Elias. And it shows you purchased accelerant 2 days before the fire. Silence. Elias's composure cracked for the first time. The laugh disappeared. The cuffs tightened. As they drove him away, Mara felt no triumph. Only a strange, hollow quiet. Months later, winter came, but Mara's shelter had transformed into a small, sturdy cabin. Neighbors helped once the truth spread. Claire visited occasionally. The insurance payout eventually cleared. The land legally and publicly hers. But more importantly, the watching had stopped. The silence now belonged to peace, not threat. One evening, as snow dusted the ground, Mara stood outside her finished cabin. She looked at the horizon Caleb had loved. She didn't feel like a widow anymore. She felt like a survivor. She had built something with broken boards. With bleeding hands. With grief as her blueprint. And sometimes strength doesn't shout. Sometimes it hammers one nail at a time while someone waits for you to fail. But she never did.